The alien king believed his daughter was lost in battle until she returned with a human. The sky above Violia burned with fire and smoke. The once serene blue atmosphere was now streaked with streaks of red and orange, as explosions rocked the surface of the planet and starships fell like burning comets. From his high throne aboard the orbital command station, King Zaroth watched with a heart heavy with both pride and fear. His empire, the Viorlian Dominion, was at war. For weeks, his fleets had battled an unknown interstellar force that swept across the sector, leaving destruction in its wake. Zaroth's daughter, Liara, had been at the forefront of the battle. She was not only his only heir but also one of the most skilled commanders in the Empire. Unlike other warriors, Liara had a rare combination of tactical genius, courage, and compassion, a combination that had earned her the loyalty of soldiers and the admiration of allies. Zaroth knew that if anyone could turn the tide of this brutal war, it was her. The battle raged on the ground and in the skies. Viorlian cruisers fired streams of plasma at enemy ships, while thousands of Viorlian soldiers fought on the planet's surface against armored alien invaders. The planet's surface shook as the invaders unleashed powerful energy weapons, carving deep scars into the landscape. Cities burned, forests collapsed, and mountains trembled under the assault. Amidst the chaos, Liara led a squadron of elite pilots, darting between explosions and debris with unmatched precision. From the command station, Zaroth's eyes never left the battlefield. His pride swelled as he watched his daughter maneuver through enemy fire, but unease gnawed at him. Something in the movement of the enemy ships felt different this time. They were faster, smarter, and more unpredictable than any force the Dominion had ever faced. Zaroth's instincts, honed over decades of ruling and waging war, screamed that the battle could change in a single heartbeat. Suddenly, the communications panel blinked red. Zaroth's chief advisor, High Strategist Neris, appeared on the screen, her expression grim. "Your Majesty," Neris began, her voice steady despite the chaos, "Liara's squadron has been hit. We've lost contact with her fleet. They were last seen engaging a heavy enemy battalion near the northern plains." Zaroth's pulse quickened. "How many survived?" he demanded, gripping the edge of his throne. Neris hesitated. "The satellites cannot confirm survivors. The area is heavily shielded and our scans show multiple debris fields consistent with destroyed vessels. It is likely that your daughter's squadron has fallen." The word struck Zaroth like a thunderbolt. His chest tightened, and for a moment the mighty king felt a human fear, a fear he had not known in decades. "Likely?" he roared, his voice echoing across the command hall. "Do you have no certainty?" Neris bowed her head. "I am sorry, Your Majesty. We will continue scanning, but the likelihood is grave." Zaroth turned from the display, pacing the length of his chamber. His mind raced. Memories of Liara as a child flooded him, her first steps on the training grounds, her laughter echoing through the palace halls, the determination in her eyes as she trained tirelessly with the young warriors of the Dominion. And now, he might have lost her forever. Outside, the battle continued unabated. On the planet's surface, smoke rose in towering columns, and the distant sound of explosions shook the very ground. Soldiers fought with desperate courage, their shouts blending with the screeching of alien engines and the crackle of energy weapons. Liara's squadron had been leading a counterattack, attempting to protect a city from the invaders' relentless advance. Her leadership had turned the tide of many small skirmishes, inspiring her soldiers to fight with unmatched resolve. But now, silence reigned over her sector. The communication blackout, the absence of signals, everything pointed to a loss that Zaroth could barely comprehend. He sank into his throne, his head heavy with grief. Around him, advisors and commanders whispered in hushed tones, afraid to speak too loudly. The Empire had lost many soldiers in the war, but losing the heir, the one who carried the future of the Dominion, was unthinkable. Hours passed. Zaroth barely ate, barely spoke. He moved from one observation window to another, staring at the battlefield below, hoping against hope for a sign, a signal, anything that could tell him that Liara was alive. But the northern plains were a wasteland of fire and wreckage, and the satellites offered no comfort. In the palace, preparations began for a mourning ceremony. The news of Liara's presumed death had to be shared with the people, for the king could not appear indecisive in the face of grief. Soldiers polished their armor, priests prepared the rites, and the empire braced itself for the loss of the princess, who had been both a symbol of hope and a living testament to Vireland courage. Meanwhile, unknown to Zaroth, Liara's story was far from over. Deep in space, her escape pod drifted through the void. The ship had been ripped from her squadron by a massive explosion, its systems damaged and barely functional. Liara, bruised and battered, struggled to remain conscious as the pod's automatic system stabilized her trajectory. She clung to life with the same determination that had made her a legendary warrior. As she floated in the endless darkness of space, Liara's mind raced. The battlefield below, the screams of her soldiers, the fire and destruction, all were etched into her memory, but she refused to give in to despair. She was trained for survival, trained for the unexpected, and she would not surrender to the void. Every action she had ever learned, every lesson from her father and the tutors of the palace, guided her through the hours of uncertainty. Her hands worked quickly, repairing damaged circuits, rerouting power and stabilizing the life support systems. The pod's sensors detected no other ships nearby, friend or foe, but Liara remained alert. She knew the enemy might follow survivors to finish the destruction. If they found her alone, she could still be captured, or worse. For hours she floated, unsure of direction or destination, relying on the pod's minimal guidance systems. The silence of space was oppressive, but it was also a strange kind of solace. Here, far from the battlefield, she could think, plan, and survive. And survive she must, for the Empire depended on it, whether Zaroth knew it or not. Back on Virelia, the Empire mourned. Statues were draped with black cloth, flags lowered, and the people prayed for their princess. Zaroth sat in the grand hall, his crown feeling heavier than ever. Advisors tried to console him, reminding him of the Empire's strength, the loyalty of his soldiers, and the unlikelihood of total loss. But the king knew, deep down, that a part of him had vanished with the news of Liara's fall. As night fell across the planet, the battle continued without pause. Fires lit the horizon, and the sky above was alive with the dance of warships and energy beams. And somewhere in the dark expanse of space, Liara's pod drifted onward, a single, fragile spark of life, carrying the hope that the Empire had not yet lost its future. She did not yet know what awaited her, danger, discovery, or perhaps even allies in unexpected places. But one thing was certain: she would fight to survive, no matter the cost. For the daughter of Zaroth, defeat was not an option, and the story of her survival was only beginning. The void of space stretched endlessly around Liara's escape pod. Stars shimmered faintly in the darkness, distant and cold, yet somehow comforting. She floated alone, her body sore and bruised, every movement reminding her of the violent explosion that had ripped her squadron apart. Every muscle ached, but Liara refused to surrender to despair. Her mind raced with questions. Where had the enemy gone? Were there other survivors? Would the Dominion know she was still alive? Her pod's sensors beeped weakly, showing minimal life support and limited propulsion power. It was enough to keep her alive, but not enough to reach Virelia or any nearby friendly stations. Hours passed and the silence pressed on her. Then, faintly, a blip appeared on the sensors, something moving, irregular and unrecognizable. Liara's pulse quickened. She activated the pod's external cameras and saw a damaged human shuttle drifting nearby. Humans. She had heard stories of them, creatures from the distant planet Earth. The Dominion considered humans minor players in galactic politics, clever, yes, but fragile and untested in the vast dangers of space. And yet, here was one, drifting alone, just as vulnerable as she was. Her curiosity and tactical instinct took over. Liara maneuvered the pod closer, keeping a cautious distance. Through the viewing screen, she saw a figure slumped in the shuttle's cockpit. The human was alive but unconscious, his breathing shallow. Liara's first instinct was to save him, but another part of her wondered, could he be a spy, an enemy agent? After a moment of hesitation, she made her decision. Life, she decided, was too precious to waste on assumptions. Using the pod's robotic arms, she carefully connected a tether to the human shuttle and began repairs. Hours passed as she worked, rerouting power, patching leaks, and stabilizing the life support. Slowly, the human stirred. His eyes blinked open, filled with fear, confusion, and awe at the strange alien presence before him. Who are you?" the human whispered, his voice weak but steady. "I am Liara of Vierlia," she said, her tone calm and commanding. "I am a warrior of my people." "You are alive because I saved you." The human blinked, trying to process her words. "Vierlia?" he asked. I'm Ethan. Earth my shuttle was destroyed. I didn't think anyone would find me." Liara studied him carefully. Ethan was smaller and less armored than any Virelian warrior she knew, but there was something in his eyes, a spark of determination perhaps, or the kind of courage that only humans seem to possess. She nodded. "You will survive, but you must follow my instructions. This shuttle is damaged and the pod can only support one additional life for a limited time. You must cooperate fully if you want to live." Ethan nodded quickly, and together they worked in silence. Liara guided him through basic repairs, explaining each step in simple terms. Though his hands were clumsy at first, Ethan learned quickly, impressing Liara with his adaptability. She realized with cautious admiration that humans had a certain cleverness that rivaled even the most trained Virelian engineers. As the hours passed, Liara shared minimal personal details. She did not speak of her father, Zaroth, or the fate of the Dominion. Instead, she focused on survival, navigation, repairs, and the careful rationing of the pod's limited resources. Ethan, despite his initial fear, began to show signs of confidence. He asked questions, offered suggestions, and even corrected a miscalculation Liara had made while plotting a safe course through a field of debris. "You're very skilled," Ethan said one night as they rested. "I've never seen anyone handle a ship like that and survive under so much pressure." Liara allowed herself a small smile, though her eyes remained focused on the monitors. "Experience teaches skills," she replied simply, "and necessity teaches even more. You will survive if you learn quickly and do not panic." Days passed. Their journey through space was long and perilous. Meteoroids and debris threatened their fragile crafts, cosmic storms distorted sensors, and the vast emptiness pressed in around them. Yet through it all, a bond began to form between the alien princess and the human pilot. They shared stories, Liara of her training, her victories, and the honor of serving her people, Ethan of Earth, of his dreams and his fascination with the stars. Though they spoke slowly at first, both learning to understand each other's languages and gestures, they began to trust one another. Ethan proved to be not only intelligent but brave. He helped Liara fend off a small swarm of space predators, creatures drawn to the heat and energy of their ships. He engineered a makeshift shield to protect the pod, saving them both from what could have been a fatal attack. Liara could not help but notice his courage. Humans, she realized, were unpredictable in a way that could be dangerous but also valuable. Unlike many Virelians, who relied heavily on training and protocols, humans adapted quickly and often found creative solutions under pressure. It was a skill that, if harnessed correctly, could be a great asset to her people. One evening, as the distant stars shimmered like diamonds against the black velvet of space, Ethan asked a question that had been on his mind since he met her. Why? Why did you save me? You didn't have to. Liara paused, her hands resting on the controls. Because it is right, she said simply. Life is valuable, even if it belongs to a species you do not know. You have the strength to survive, and I have the duty to protect those who can fight beside me. Ethan nodded slowly, absorbing her words. On Earth we have a saying, he said. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. You've lived that every day. Liara considered his words carefully. Humans were strange creatures, fragile, yet unyielding in spirit. They feared death as deeply as any Virelian, but unlike many Virelians, their courage often came from a stubborn refusal to give up, no matter how impossible the odds. She found herself respecting Ethan more than she had expected. Their journey was not without danger. A rogue patrol of alien raiders, curious about the explosion near Virelia, detected Liara's pod. Using a combination of stealth maneuvers and Ethan's ingenuity, they avoided detection. Ethan improvised shields and decoys, while Liara used her knowledge of military tactics to anticipate the raiders' movements. Together, they navigated through a dangerous asteroid field, dodging collisions and enemy sensors alike. By the end of the week, the pod had traveled farther than Liara had thought possible. Supplies were low, but both survived. They began to develop routines. Ethan would check the engines while Liara plotted navigation. She would rest while he monitored life support systems. They shared meals from the pod's emergency rations, laughing quietly at the strange tastes and textures. Small moments like these reminded them that even in the darkest corners of space, life persisted. One night, Liara lay staring at the stars through the pod's observation window. The distant glow of Virelia was faint but visible on the edge of her sensors. She thought of her father, of the grief that must have struck the Empire at her presumed death. Her heart ached at the thought of leaving her people, but she reminded herself that survival was the first step. Only by living could she return to Virelia and fulfill her duties. Ethan, sensing her thoughts, placed a hand on the console near hers. You'll get back, he said quietly, and when you do, your father will be proud. He has every reason to be. Liara nodded, a rare moment of vulnerability passing between them. She realized that humans, for all their weaknesses, had a kind of wisdom that came from seeing the world differently. Ethan's optimism, courage, and adaptability were proof that life, even in the smallest forms, could change outcomes in ways even a great empire could not predict. By the time Virelia's orbit appeared clearly on the pod's sensors, both Liara and Ethan knew that their journey together had changed them. They were no longer just a Virelian princess and a human pilot. They were allies, companions forged by survival, and a partnership that could withstand the dangers of the universe. As the pod approached the planet, Liara activated the communication array. Though she knew the Empire would have assumed her dead, she needed to send a signal, a proof of life, before attempting re-entry. The message was brief but clear: Liara Virelia, alive, accompanied by human survivor. The response, when it came, was delayed by several tense minutes. Then a crackling transmission reached them, acknowledged, coordinates received, prepare for controlled descent, Virelia awaits. Liara allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. The hardest part of their journey was over, the survival in the void, but a new challenge awaited on the planet below. How would her father react? How would the Empire receive a human at her side? Questions swirled, but Liara felt ready. Together, she and Ethan had survived against impossible odds. Together, they could face anything. The pod descended toward Virelia, glinting against the planet's horizon. Fires from the ongoing battle still marked the landscape, but in the distance, banners of the Empire flew proudly. Liara's heart pounded with anticipation. The story of her survival was only the beginning. And somewhere deep in the command station, King Zaroth stared at the approaching pod, unaware that his daughter, against all odds, was returning to him, not alone, but with a human companion who would challenge his perception of the universe forever. The pod's descent through Virelia's upper atmosphere was turbulent. Flames licked the outer hull as the craft fought against gravity and the residual heat from nearby fires. Liara's hands moved with practiced precision, adjusting shields, stabilizers, and thrusters in a delicate dance of survival. Ethan, strapped beside her, gritted his teeth as the vibrations shook the cabin. "I've never felt anything like this," Ethan shouted over the roar. "Is this normal?" Liara gave him a brief glance, her eyes calm and focused. "Not for a human," she admitted. "But stay steady. Panic will not help." Minutes passed, each longer than the last, until the pod finally breached the lower atmosphere. The sky above Virelia was streaked with smoke and the distant flash of energy weapons from ongoing skirmishes. Fires burned across forests and plains, and shattered cities marked the scars of war. Liara's heart ached at the sight, but she pushed the grief aside. She had survived, and now her people needed her more than ever. "Where exactly do we land?" Ethan asked, scanning the landscape below. Liara pointed to a fortified city near the planet's northern plains. "Here. It is one of the few areas still under Dominion control. The others are too dangerous. We will land there and move cautiously." The pod touched down with a harsh jolt, rolling across scorched terrain before coming to a stop near the city's outer gates. Liara and Ethan quickly assessed the damage. The landing was rough, but both were unharmed. Outside, the air was thick with smoke, dust, and the acrid smell of burnt metal. Small skirmishes continued around the city, but the immediate area seemed clear of enemy forces. Liara activated the pod's comm system. A faint signal flickered from the city's defense network. "This is Princess Liara," she transmitted. "I am alive, requesting safe passage to the inner city." The response came hesitantly, crackling over the comm. "Identity confirmed. Authorized. Proceed with caution." Liara exhaled slowly. Finally, she could return to her people. But the journey from the pod to the city gates was not simple. The streets were littered with debris, abandoned vehicles, and the occasional fallen soldier. Shadows moved in the distance, raiders, scavengers, or remnants of enemy forces. Liara led the way, moving quickly and silently, her combat training guiding each step. Ethan followed closely, his human instincts keeping him alert despite his exhaustion. Along the way, Ethan marveled at the alien architecture, the towering spires of the city, and the intricate designs etched into every surface. "Your people, they build like nothing I've ever seen," he said quietly. Liara glanced at him, a small smile touching her lips. "Virelia values strength and endurance. Our buildings must endure both time and war. But beauty is also important. Strength without honor is meaningless." Hours passed as they navigated the city's outskirts. They encountered small pockets of resistance, enemy stragglers still trying to loot and destroy. But Liara and Ethan worked seamlessly. Liara's combat skill and strategy combined with Ethan's quick thinking allowed them to avoid or neutralize threats efficiently. At one point, Ethan rigged a series of makeshift traps using debris and the pod's remaining energy cells, funneling a group of raiders into a narrow alley where they could be safely contained without violence. By late evening, they reached the gates of the fortified city. Guards immediately recognized Liara, though many were still skeptical. Rumors of her death had spread quickly, and her sudden return, accompanied by a human, was unexpected. The soldiers drew their weapons but paused as Liara raised her hands in a signal of peace. "I am Princess Liara," she announced, her voice calm but authoritative. "I return to the Dominion. No harm comes to those who obey the law and protect the people." The guards hesitated, exchanging nervous glances. Then, after a tense moment, they lowered their weapons and opened the gates. Liara and Ethan passed through, escorted by a small contingent of soldiers who seemed both awed and wary. Inside the city, chaos reigned. Fires burned in several districts, and wounded soldiers and civilians crowded the streets. Liara moved quickly, her mind calculating every possibility. Her first priority was the command station, where she could contact her father and relay the details of her survival. Ethan followed, his eyes wide as he took in the devastation. "Your people, they fight so hard," Ethan said quietly. "Even when things seem hopeless, they don't give up." Liara nodded. "Survival is not just about strength. It is about spirit, determination, and the will to endure. These are qualities humans share with Virelians. That is why you survived, and why you can help us now." As they reached the command station, Liara paused. The structure was partially damaged, but the central communication array remained intact. She accessed the network, sending a secure signal to the main palace. "I am alive. I return with a human survivor. Prepare for my arrival." Moments later, a response came from an unknown source within the palace. "Acknowledged. Approach with caution. Imperial protocols in effect." Liara glanced at Ethan. "This is it," she said. "We are moments away from seeing my father." The journey from the command station to the palace was tense. Soldiers and citizens alike stared at her, whispering rumors and speculations. Many were shocked, some in disbelief. And many were curious about the human at her side. Liara could feel their judgment but ignored it. Her focus was on reaching her father and ensuring both their safety. When they finally reached the throne hall, the doors opened to reveal a figure standing tall and imposing, King Zaroth. His armor gleamed despite the scratches and burns from the ongoing war. His eyes, sharp and calculating, softened slightly as they fell upon Liara. But before he could speak, his gaze shifted to Ethan, lingering with confusion, suspicion, and something else, curiosity. "Father," Liara said, bowing respectfully, "I am alive, and I bring a survivor from the battle, a human named Ethan." Zaroth's voice was steady but filled with an undercurrent of emotion. "You survived." His eyes searched her face for any signs of injury or deceit. "And you have brought a human into my palace." Liara met his gaze calmly. "He is not a threat. He is resourceful, brave, and loyal. He helped me survive. He deserves trust, at least until proven otherwise." Zaroth studied Ethan carefully. The human stood tall despite the alien surroundings, his posture straight, his expression firm. There was no fear in his eyes, only respect and curiosity. Zaroth's mind, trained to assess threats and allies alike, began to consider possibilities. "You expect me to accept this?" Zaroth asked, his voice quiet but intense. "A human companion to my daughter in the heart of the Dominion." Liara stepped forward. "He is more than a human. He is an example of courage, adaptability, and intelligence. He has proven himself in ways many Virelians cannot. I trust him, and I ask you to do the same." For a long moment, silence filled the throne hall. Soldiers and advisors watched, holding their breath. Then slowly Zaroth nodded. "Very well," he said. "But know this, trust is earned and betrayal will not be tolerated. Welcome him carefully." Ethan inclined his head respectfully. "Thank you, Your Majesty," he said. "I only wish to help." The tension eased slightly, and Liara felt a small measure of relief. Yet the journey was far from over. Messages came in from other sectors. Reports of ongoing battles, struggling outposts, and remnants of enemy forces still attempting to take advantage of the chaos. Liara realized that her survival and return were just the beginning of a larger mission, restoring order, protecting her people, and proving the value of alliances across species. In the following days, Liara and Ethan worked together to assess the damage. Ethan's human perspective offered fresh insights into strategy, logistics, and resource management. Liara's leadership and tactical skill complemented his ideas, forming a partnership that surprised even the most seasoned Virelian commanders. Through joint operations, They secured key districts of the city, rescued trapped civilians, and coordinated counterattacks against remaining enemy forces. Each success strengthened their bond, and slowly, soldiers and citizens began to see Ethan not as an outsider, but as a valuable ally. One evening, as the sun set behind the city's burned skyline, Liara and Ethan stood on a balcony overlooking the streets. Smoke rose from fires still burning, but in the distance, the first signs of recovery appeared. Civilians were clearing debris, soldiers were repairing defenses, and hope began to return to the hearts of the people. "You know," Ethan said, "I never imagined I'd be fighting beside an alien princess, or that I'd survive space and war to see this." Liara smiled faintly. "You have survived and you have learned. That is more than most humans or Virelians can claim. Your courage matters. Your choices matter." Ethan looked out over the city, the gravity of their journey settling in. I think I understand now. Survival isn't just about fighting. It's about working together, trusting others, and never giving up no matter what." Liara nodded. "Exactly. That is the strength of the Dominion, and perhaps the strength of humanity as well." As night fell, the stars above Violia shone faintly through the lingering smoke. The city, scarred but alive, reflected the resilience of its people. And Liara, alongside a human who had become her companion and ally, prepared for the next chapter of her journey, restoring hope, defending her empire, and proving that courage and collaboration could overcome even the darkest challenges of the universe. The city of Violia buzzed with a mix of excitement and tension. News of Princess Liara's return had spread faster than any transmission could carry, reaching soldiers, citizens, and officials alike. Whispers of amazement filled the streets. The air, thought lost in the northern plains, was alive, and she had brought a human with her. Inside the palace, King Zaroth prepared for the homecoming ceremony. He stood on the high balcony overlooking the central plaza, the weight of the crown heavier than ever. His armor, polished but marked from recent skirmishes, reflected the burning light of the setting sun. Soldiers marched in precise formations below, their movements sharp, disciplined, and unwavering. This day was unprecedented. Not only would his daughter return, but she would challenge long-held beliefs about humans, allies, and the strength of the Dominion itself. Liara entered the palace quietly, accompanied by Ethan. Soldiers bowed as she passed, murmuring words of reverence and relief. Citizens lined the streets outside, craning to catch a glimpse of the princess who had defied death and returned with a human at her side. Some were skeptical, others cautious, and a few were openly fearful. But the princess's calm confidence and the human's steady presence commanded attention. "Father," Liara said as they approached the throne room, her voice carrying a mix of authority and warmth. "I have returned, and I bring with me proof that survival and courage transcend species. This human, Ethan, has helped me in ways even Virelians cannot." Zaroth's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned Ethan. The human stood tall, his posture confident, his eyes steady. There was no arrogance, no challenge, only respect and honesty. The king's mind, trained to read intentions, assessed the human carefully. Then slowly he nodded. "You have survived, Liara," Zaroth said, his voice strong but touched with emotion. "That alone honors the Dominion. And you bring a human, I will judge him as you request. Speak, child, tell me what you have learned." Liara took a deep breath. She began recounting the events following the battle, the destruction of her squadron, the drifting in the void, the encounter with Ethan, and their shared struggle to survive. She spoke of his ingenuity, courage, and adaptability, providing specific examples of how he had saved her, repaired the pod, and helped navigate through dangers she could not have managed alone. As she spoke, the room fell silent. Advisors and generals exchanged glances, some skeptical, others intrigued. The concept of a human ally was unprecedented in Dominion history. Many considered humans weak, untested, and unpredictable. Yet Liara's words painted a different picture, a story of resourcefulness, bravery, and cooperation. When she finished, Ethan stepped forward. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing slightly, "I am not a Virelian. I do not claim to understand all your ways. But I survived because I followed Princess Liara, and together we worked to overcome dangers. My goal is simple: to help, to contribute, and to respect your people." Zaroth studied him in silence. Then, slowly, he allowed a small nod. "Words alone mean little. But actions reveal truth. You have acted with courage and wisdom, human. You will be considered an ally. But understand this: the Dominion's trust is earned, and betrayal will not be tolerated." Ethan inclined his head respectfully. "I understand, Your Majesty. I will earn it." Liara felt a sense of relief wash over her. The first step had been achieved. The human was accepted, at least tentatively, into the heart of the Dominion. Yet challenges remained. Some officials whispered doubts, political factions remained wary, and rumors of her unexpected companion stirred unease. But Liara knew that in time, Ethan's actions would prove his worth to the Empire. The first official ceremony was held in the central plaza. Citizens, soldiers, and nobles gathered, their eyes fixed on the stage where Liara and Zaroth stood. Flags fluttered in the wind, banners displayed the insignia of the Dominion, and the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. The king raised his hand for silence. "People of Virelia," Zaroth began, his voice carrying across the plaza, "our empire has faced dark days. We have suffered losses and endured hardships. But today hope returns. My daughter, Princess Liara, has returned from battle, alive and triumphant. And with her she brings an ally, a human named Ethan, whose courage and skill saved her life." The crowd murmured, some with surprise, others with admiration. Liara stepped forward, her gaze sweeping across the thousands gathered. "My people," she said, her voice calm and steady, "we have endured war, loss, and uncertainty, but we have also seen strength, loyalty, and courage. Ethan, though not Virelian, has shown these qualities. He has proven that alliances, trust, and cooperation can save lives, even in the darkest times." For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then a ripple of applause began, growing louder as more citizens recognized the truth in her words. Soldiers cheered, their voices rising above the city, and even some of the skeptical nobles nodded in approval. The ceremony concluded with a symbolic gesture. Liara extended her hand to Ethan, and he clasped it firmly. The image of a human and Virelian princess standing side by side became a powerful symbol of unity, hope, and the potential for collaboration across species. After the ceremony, Liara and Ethan were escorted to the palace for debriefing. Reports from the battlefield, recovery operations, and political assessments awaited them. Liara's mind was sharp, focused on strategy and planning. She knew that the war was far from over, that enemy forces still threatened the outer sectors, and that the Empire needed strong leadership now more than ever. Ethan proved invaluable. His human perspective allowed him to see weaknesses in enemy positions, propose alternative strategies, and suggest innovations that Virelians had not considered. Together, he and Liara developed plans to secure supply lines, protect vulnerable cities, and coordinate counterattacks against remaining invaders. Zaroth observed their collaboration with growing respect. Humans, he realized, were more resourceful than many of his advisors had assumed. Ethan's ingenuity complemented Liara's experience and tactical skill, creating a partnership that promised to strengthen the Empire in ways previously unimaginable. Yet not all welcomed this change. Some officials whispered behind closed doors, questioning the wisdom of involving a human in imperial strategy. They feared contamination of traditions, loss of control, and the unpredictable nature of an outsider. Liara, aware of these concerns, remained resolute. Trust and respect had to be earned, she knew, but so did progress. In the following days, Liara and Ethan toured the city, inspecting defenses, meeting soldiers, and visiting districts still struggling with the aftermath of battle. Citizens approached them cautiously at first, but Ethan's calm demeanor and Liara's reputation quickly won their trust. Stories of their survival in space and their cooperation became a source of inspiration, reminding the people that courage and ingenuity were not limited to a single species. During one visit to a medical facility, Liara watched as Ethan assisted medics in organizing supplies and tending to wounded soldiers. His actions were practical, thoughtful, and effective. Liara realized that humans possessed a unique combination of creativity and adaptability, a skill set that could prove invaluable to the Dominion's recovery and defense. As night fell over the city, Liara stood on a balcony overlooking the plaza. Fires from earlier skirmishes still burned, but the streets below were filled with citizens working together to rebuild. Soldiers patrolled methodically, ensuring safety and order. And in the distance, the palace gates glimmered with the last light of the setting sun. Ethan joined her, his gaze following hers. "They trust us," he said quietly. "The people, they believe in what we've done." Liara nodded. "Trust is fragile," she said. "It must be maintained through action, not words. But today we have taken the first step. Together we will rebuild, defend, and protect our empire." For a moment, the two stood in silence, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. From the void of space, through battles and uncertainty, they had survived. They had forged a bond stronger than fear or prejudice. And now, they faced the challenges of homecoming, diplomacy, and leadership. In the days that followed, Liara and Ethan continued their efforts to secure the city and surrounding regions. They coordinated with commanders, devised strategies to prevent further incursions, and trained volunteers to assist in defense operations. The people, inspired by their leadership and courage, began to see a new future, one where alliances and cooperation could overcome even the most daunting threats. Zaroth, observing their progress, allowed himself a rare moment of pride. His daughter had returned, not only alive but stronger, wiser, and more capable than ever. And the human at her side had proven that courage, ingenuity, and loyalty were universal qualities, not limited by species or origin. As the sun rose over Vierlia, bathing the city in golden light, Liara stood beside Ethan on the palace balcony. Together, they looked toward the horizon, toward a future filled with challenges but also hope. The empire was wounded but not broken. The people were inspired, and alliances, once unimaginable, had begun to form. For Liara, the homecoming was more than a return. It was a new beginning. And with Ethan by her side, she knew that the Dominion's strength, courage, and spirit could overcome any obstacle. The story of her survival and the human who had stood with her would become legend, a tale of courage, trust, and the power of collaboration across the stars. The first light of Vierlia's sun spilled over the city, glinting off the palace towers and illuminating streets still. Recovering from battle. Smoke rose gently from small fires, but the air carried a sense of hope and determination that had been absent for weeks. Citizens emerged from shelters, soldiers resumed patrols, and the empire slowly began to breathe again. Princess Liara stood on the balcony overlooking the central plaza, her posture calm but strong. Beside her, Ethan scanned the streets below, noting the efforts of citizens and soldiers alike. Together, they had navigated unimaginable dangers, survived the void of space, and returned to a war-torn planet. And now, a new challenge awaited, rebuilding the Dominion, restoring trust, and showing that alliances, even with a human, could strengthen the empire. King Zaroth approached, his armor polished and regal despite the scars of war. His eyes, sharp and commanding as ever, softened as they fell on his daughter. "Liara," he said quietly, "you have returned not only alive but stronger than I imagined. And this human, he has proven himself. You have both given hope to the Dominion. Liara inclined her head respectfully. Father, survival alone is not enough. We must rebuild and we must prepare for the future. There are still enemies, scattered forces that may attempt to exploit our weakness, but together we can restore the Empire's strength and protect its people. Zaroth's gaze shifted to Ethan. The human met his eyes without hesitation. You have fought, survived, and acted with honor, Zaroth said. That is all a warrior, Virelian or otherwise, can do to earn respect. Ethan bowed slightly. Thank you, Your Majesty. I only wish to serve. The king nodded and turned his attention back to Liara. Then we will begin. Let this day mark the start of a new era for the Dominion. The days that followed were filled with effort, strategy, and collaboration. Liara and Ethan worked closely with generals, engineers, and diplomats to assess the Empire's needs. Supply lines were repaired, damaged districts rebuilt, and defenses strengthened. Citizens volunteered to help, inspired by the courage and ingenuity of the princess and her human companion. Liara was particularly impressed by Ethan's adaptability. He suggested methods to improve communication between cities, reorganized supply routes to avoid bottlenecks, and even helped design new defensive systems using limited resources. The Virelian engineers were initially skeptical of human methods, but after seeing the results, they could not deny their effectiveness. One afternoon, Liara and Ethan visited a recently liberated district. Children ran through the streets, laughter replacing the cries of fear that had once filled the air. Citizens worked together to clear debris, rebuild homes, and restore marketplaces. Liara knelt to speak with a young girl, handing her a small med kit and encouraging her bravery. Ethan assisted with repairs, demonstrating tools and techniques that fascinated the citizens. This is different, Ethan said quietly to Liara as they walked through the streets. I've seen cities in chaos before, but the way your people respond, they don't just survive. They organize, they rebuild, and they help each other. It's incredible, Liara nodded. Virelians value honor, duty, and community. Survival is not just personal, it is shared. Humans have similar strengths, but here, you can see the results of a society built on collaboration and courage. Their work did not go unnoticed. Reports of their efforts spread across the Dominion. Soldiers praised Ethan's ingenuity and bravery. Citizens admired his willingness to work alongside a Virelian princess, and officials began to reconsider old biases against humans. Slowly but surely, trust grew, and with trust came unity. Political tensions, however, were still present. Some factions remained wary of a human playing a prominent role in the empire. They questioned whether the Dominion should rely on outsiders, fearing that humans might be unpredictable or disloyal. Liara addressed these concerns directly in council meetings, presenting evidence of Ethan's contributions, strategic thinking, and bravery. Do not judge him by his species, Liara said firmly during one council session. Judge him by his actions, his courage, and his loyalty. He has proven himself in the void of space, in the chaos of battle, and in the defense of our people. That is the standard of the Dominion. Her words, delivered with authority and sincerity, resonated with many. Over time, even the most skeptical officials began to see the truth. Courage, intelligence, and loyalty were not limited to Virelians. Humans, with their adaptability and determination, could be trusted allies and potentially powerful partners in the Empire's future. Meanwhile, Liara and Ethan continued to lead joint missions. They trained soldiers, coordinated supply convoys, and implemented defensive measures against scattered enemy forces. Each success strengthened their bond and the respect of those around them. Citizens, inspired by their story, began to volunteer in greater numbers, helping rebuild cities, fortify defenses, and care for the wounded. One evening, as the sun set behind the palace towers, Liara and Ethan stood on a balcony overlooking the city. Fires from recent skirmishes still smoldered, but the streets were alive with movement and determination. Soldiers patrolled, citizens worked together, and a sense of order began to return. Ethan turned to Liara. I never imagined I'd be here standing beside you helping rebuild an empire, but seeing what your people can do, it makes everything we endured worth it. Liara smiled faintly. You have contributed as much as any Virelian soldier, perhaps more. Courage, creativity, and loyalty, these are not limited by species. You have proven that survival and success often depends on the ability to work together across differences. Ethan nodded. I think I understand now. Humans, Virelians, it doesn't matter. What matters is courage, determination, and cooperation. That's what keeps people alive and what builds empires. Liara glanced at the city below, a quiet pride in her heart. The Dominion had survived the war, but more importantly, it had learned a lesson that would shape its future. Strength came not just from power, but from alliances, courage, and trust. In the following weeks, Liara and Ethan oversaw the integration of humans into the Dominion's infrastructure. They trained human engineers, soldiers, and diplomats, creating a bridge between worlds. Citizens observed the collaboration with curiosity at first, then with respect, and finally with admiration. Humans were no longer outsiders. They were allies, partners in building a stronger, united empire. Zaroth watched the progress with cautious optimism. At first skeptical of humans, he had come to respect Ethan's contributions and character. The king realized that by embracing cooperation, the Dominion could not only survive but thrive in a universe filled with unknown dangers. One afternoon, the king called Liara and Ethan to the throne room. You have both proven yourselves beyond measure, Zaroth said. Your courage, loyalty, and wisdom have strengthened this empire. Liara, you have returned not just as a survivor but as a leader who sees beyond tradition. Ethan, you have shown that humans can be trusted allies and friends. Liara and Ethan bowed. Thank you, Your Majesty, Liara said. We will continue to serve the Empire and protect its people. Ethan added, I am honored to serve the Dominion, and I will do my best to uphold your trust. Zaroth's expression softened. Then let this be the beginning of a new era. One where courage, cooperation, and honor define the Dominion, not fear, suspicion, or prejudice. Together, Virelians and humans will face whatever the universe throws at us. Together, we will be strong. The words resonated through the throne room, echoing beyond the palace walls, reaching soldiers, citizens, and allies across the empire. It was a declaration of hope, unity, and the promise of a better future. As the days turned into weeks, the empire stabilized. Cities were rebuilt, borders secured, and alliances strengthened. Liara and Ethan continued their work, leading missions, advising leaders, and inspiring citizens. Their story became a legend, a symbol of courage, determination, and the power of collaboration across species. At night, when the city was quiet and the stars shone above, Liara and Ethan often stood together on the palace balcony. They reflected on their journey, from the void of space, through danger and uncertainty, to the heart of the empire. They had faced impossible odds, survived, and changed the course of history. Ethan broke the silence one night. You know, back on Earth, people tell stories about heroes who do impossible things. I never thought I'd live one of those stories myself. But here I am standing with a princess helping rebuild an empire. Liara smiled. And you have done more than survive. You have shown courage, intelligence, and loyalty. You have proven that true strength is not in birth or species, but in the choices we make and the actions we take. The human and the alien stood together, gazing at the horizon. Fires of rebuilding glowed below, reflecting determination and hope. Above, the stars promised infinite possibilities. The Dominion was stronger, its people inspired, and its future brighter than ever. Together, Liara and Ethan had not only survived, they had reshaped the empire. They had shown that courage, loyalty, and cooperation could overcome even the darkest challenges of the universe. And with that lesson, the story of Virlia entered a new chapter, one of unity, strength, and a future built on trust and courage across worlds.